Welcome to the Young Indy Chroniclers, a podcast about the making of the show, The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, which first aired on ABC in 1992.
Kept thinking about what was Indiana Jones like as a young man. I came up with this idea of him seeing the world through the eyes of a soldier and a secret agent.
Over the course of our podcast, we're going to talk to a whole host of very talented people who either worked on this show or were there from the beginning.
We were able to shoot it on location in the real places where these events took place.
Oh, make it up as you go. Oh boy, that's great advice.
We hired some of the best European directors, a whole host of very, very talented people.
I'm your host, Peter Holmstrom.
And I'm Daniel Noah, and this is the Young Indy Chroniclers.
There's only one rule, Indiana. Stay alive.
Welcome back to the Young Indy Chroniclers, the internet's one and only podcast devoted specifically and only to the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. I'm your host, Peter Holmstrom, and with me, as always, is the man who looks very good in a fedora, I have to imagine, Mr. Daniel Noah.
Hey, hello. We will have to try that fedora trick out and see what happens.
On today's show, I'm very excited about this one. We have someone who not only was there during the original time of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, but also has since gone on to do a number of podcasts, and you could describe him as a bit of a historian about Indiana Jones. But he was an assistant sound engineer on the Young Indiana Jones and has gone on to have a very fruitful and career in Hollywood. Mr. Laird Malamed, thanks very much for being here today.
Oh, Peter, Daniel, thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks for caring about Young Indy and wanting to capture it. I'm so thrilled that people still know this show, and I want to do something about it, talk about it.
That's awesome. That is why we're here. We are here to spread the love and to talk about that love as well. So it'll be great to have this conversation today. I wonder if we could just start out, if you could talk a bit about where you come from, how you first got involved in the industry and what led you to San Francisco and into Young Indiana Jones.
Sure, happy to that. So I'm from LA, so you'd think, oh, okay, he's from Hollywood. Yeah, parents in financial services. No, not from Hollywood. Growing up, we'd see stars, much more commonly in the 70s than we did today. I remember cousins in from New York, and we're at a rib place and there's somebody famous and they're falling over themselves and they're like, oh yeah, he's here all the time. Here's a little tidbit of being in the industry and not knowing who you're sitting next to. So my parents went to UCLA and had season tickets to UCLA basketball games and football, but basketball. And so we had 4 seats, and then the 2 next to us was Walter Mirisch and his wife, the great producer of so many different things, Pink Panther,
wow,
and Midway, and as being as a big John Williams fan, which maybe we'll touch upon, he hired John Williams to do lots of, what do I know as a 10-year-old? He's just a nice guy who I'm chatting with, and only now I'm starstruck when he actually recently passed away, but the interest in media maybe is infused by growing up in West LA and going to a high school that had a lot of famous people, a lot of famous people's kids. I was yelled at by Michael Bay as a 9th grader for messing with a prop from his stage thing. His sister was in my class, so that was the kind of thing that, I didn't know he was Michael Bay yet. I would have actually paid attention. So I did get to meet him later and say, we both went to Crossroads, and it didn't even register to him. So he was making Transformers. So anyway, but that high school, the reason I touched about the high schools, we had sort of a legend in film teaching, a gentleman named Jim Hosney, who's still around. He taught at AFI, he taught at Westlake, which is at that point a school for girls, where my sister went, and he taught at Crossroads. And so the English class for 10th grade was a film and media class, basically. That was the honors English class. And so we watched movies and read books and then talked about them. And that's a fantastic way to spend time. So we took 4 classes to watch Apocalypse Now. So that was interesting. And 3 to watch 2001. But my bug really came from, the school had read, or the grade had read Moby Dick. That was our summer reading. Everybody's reading the same thing. I actually happened to go to Nantucket that summer on vacation, so that was even better to read Moby Dick in Nantucket. And got back, and a few weeks passed, and Jim's like, okay, well, everyone come see me and tell me their Moby Dick paper topic for this like 6-page essay we're going to write. And I'm like, I don't know, go to Jim, and I'm like, Jim, I don't know what I'm going to write about. He's like, well, didn't you mention that like in like the Star Trek movie, like one of the characters is quoting Moby Dick?
He tasks me. He tasks me, and I shall have him. I'll chase him round the moons of Nibia and round the Antares maelstrom and round perdition's flames before I give him up.
I'm like, yeah, like Khan, he like says some of the lines, or he turns them into like the space version of those sea lines and whatever. And yeah, so he's like, well, just write about that.
From hell's heart, I stab at thee. For hate's sake, I spit my last breath at thee.
I'm like, I can write about Star Trek 2 and Moby Dick? He's like, yeah, that's film criticism, media criticism. That's great. And so I did, and I got an A. And I think that's my origin story. It was like, oh my gosh, this stuff's really cool. And of course, I didn't then go to college for film. I went for engineering, and a series of things happened that convinced me I actually really wanted to do film. So I made my own major and added film and media in. And so I got to work in the media lab and documentary filmmaking, which was a blast. Again, you don't know who you're around. Ricky Leacock, who's a very famous documentarian. This is going to be like name dropping. It sounds terrible. You can cut all this out. And only later after, like I had classes, and I actually had classes with his sort of protege, Gloria Davenport, who was another fantastic documentary filmmaker. And then you're like, oh my God, he did Monterey Pop. It's like, and a whole bunch of other groundbreaking stuff in the 60s and whatnot. He once asked me after I had a fight with my girlfriend and I was late for a meeting, and he's like just very dryly like, who won? I'm like, well, it was sort of a tie. And he's like, well, that's too bad. You should win next time. But they're just all people and personalities. And so then I was fortunate to then get into USC Film School, which was my first choice, and went there. And then this is where the engineering and the film collapse. Of course, I went because I was going to be the next Spielberg. I mean, you guys can all understand that. And you're probably surprised I didn't become the next Spielberg. I wake up every day shocked. But no, I fell in love with sound. Tom Holman, the creator of THX, was a professor at USC. And I took his class first semester. And I'm like, this is it. This is engineering and arts. And it's magic. And you can change everything. And you do it. You're the last step. So you kind of see the finished product. This is... there's an engineering side to this that's huge. And so I pursued that, used those computer skills to build a database program I was a TA in the sound department, and we'd had a manual way of like checking out Nagras for people. So I'm like, why don't we just build a database and like run a computer, and then we can like know if something's like late coming back. And ironically, or coincidentally, or happily, that got the notice of the dean, who's this kid down in sound department who's playing with computers and no sound. And then it happened to be that George Lucas, starring Young Indy, which is the first digitally edited post-production TV show, and he was prepping a lot of the pathways for Star Wars, we know now, for the return of the special editions and then of Episode 1. And so he called down and he said, by any chance, is there somebody who understands sound and computers who wants a job? And the dean left me a note or something and said, please come see me. I'm like, now what have I done? I was pretty sure we had a permit for that film shoot. And I didn't drop that Panavision camera, I swear. But so he took me to lunch at Ken Muro was the dean at the time. He took me to lunch at the faculty club, which I had never been to, and I have not been to since. And he said, George is embarking on, and I'm like, Star Wars, right? He's like, well, no, he's doing Indiana Jones first. I'm like, even better. And so they set me up to have an interview. And anyway, so I got the job. And that's, I guess, longer answer than you wanted probably. Where was I from? This takes that.
About what year did that happen?
Yeah, 1991. In fact, my interview was 10 years to the day from seeing Raiders. I saw Raiders on Saturday, June 13th, 1981. At the Mann National Theater. saw my friend Todd Mintz, the 1040 show. I don't know any of this stuff. And then my interview was like a decade later, almost to the hour.
Well, that's June 1991. And at that point, do you know where Young Indy was in its production process? Like, when were you brought on to the project?
So Young Indy had gotten funding from ABC. They had... I didn't start till August. So the interview was in June. I got the job a week later, and I started in August. And there was already footage. So I think they had shot test footage with George Hall, with Sean Patrick Flannery, I think with Corey Carrier. So George Hall played Old Indy. For those who don't know, Sean Patrick Flannery, who played Teenage Indy and up into his 20s. And then Corey Carrier and the handful of 8 to 10-year-old Indy things. So there was footage of all that stuff. So there were some test reels and things like that. I think I'm fairly sure they had shot the stage stuff for the Mexico part, which became My First Adventure, which is, actually Curse of the Jackal became part of Curse of the Jackal. And then as I got there in August, it was just rolling in. So and all the scripts for season 1 were done. They were all accessible to us. So they were well through, they were basically on the cusp of production.
That's great. So they had shot the pilot, it sounds like, or most of it, and they were in production of the season. So the pilot is a combination of 8-year-old Indy in Egypt 1908, meeting T.E. Lawrence for the first time, and Howard Carter, and sort of the parade of famous people. And then you cut forward. At that time, the bridging sequences was 90-year-old Indy in a museum, and those are long gone. And then jumped into Mexico, where spoiler alert, where the Jackal is recovered. And now in the re-releases, that takes place like 9 hours later or something that. Yeah. Yeah, it's important for the listeners to know that the original pilot, Curse of the Jackal, which aired on ABC, you can't get certainly a legal copy or a mastered copy of maybe of a VHS that you taped off of TV. That's you're pretty lucky.
Yeah, I have a copy.
Hey,
Laird has the copy. We can get it from Laird.
One copy.
Yeah. No, I knew it was history. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
No, I just it's interesting you talk about how you were brought on. I mean, the show premieres like, let's see, it was August you were brought on, so that would be 8 months later is when the show premiered, March 4th, I believe, of 92.
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, I mean, the sound department wasn't set up yet. So I was hired by Tom Belfort, who's an Academy Award-winning sound editor. And I think, I guess Ben, Burt, and George Lucas hired me, but handed me to Tom. Right. And then at that point, we had a couple editors on. I want to say Larry Oatfield and maybe Michael Summers were both on already. Chris Garabozio, all these people have gone on to do things. If you look up their credits, they're not exactly household names, but they, done a lot of really interesting stuff, because the stuff coming through Skywalker Sound, where they worked for years, just continued to be interesting after interesting after interesting. And many of these folks had already done a lot of stuff. And I was like the first assistant hired. And then I was promptly told to interview, quotation marks, Matthew Wood and hire him. And so the first person I ever hired for a job is the voice of General Grievous, and of course an Academy Award-winning sound designer, and oversees most of the Star Wars stuff today, and a good friend.
Anakin Skywalker, I was expecting someone with your reputation to be a little older.
General Grievous, you're shorter than I expected.
But I can't take a lot of credit. I mean, Tom says, like, this will be your, the second person we hire in the assistant department. I'm like, okay, seems cool. And Matt and I would spend lunches playing LucasArts video games together. And Matt's girlfriend at the time worked at LucasArts, like in their marketing department. And we would basically call Chris up when we got stuck. Chris, how do you solve this puzzle? Until she got so frustrated, she just sent us the help guide.
I miss those books. Those things were great.
Yeah. But you could go to the Lucas store, which was like an alley by Kerner, where ILM was and LucasArts was at that point, and like buy games for like $5.
Wow.
It was fantastic. Yeah.
It's a great time, those early 90s computer games.
They were awesome. And going back to your question, so yeah, so by the time I came on board, I think the full pilot must have been shot versus when I saw everybody in June or for the interview, which is its own trials and tribulations. I mean, it's my first time at the ranch. You know, it's like I could barely speak. I wouldn't have hired myself. I was like just staring out the window at Lake Ewok, and then the interesting thing that happened was so it's about 6 months beforehand. Somebody at ABC got nervous and announced they were going to come visit. And so that rolled down to us, who had just basically assembled. We had these big, huge editing machines called Post Pros. We ran the tech building at Skywalker Sound at that point, and maybe still today. The floors come up, the carpet, and they're numbered, and then there's wood paneling that comes up, and there are troughs going from machine rooms into the edit rooms and into the stages. I mean, we literally ran the cable to like build these digital systems. You know, think 6-foot towers with DAT drives that failed all the time, and then really a dumb terminal in the edit room with a MIDI keyboard for bending and stuff like that. But frankly, the interface didn't look terribly different than Pro Tools looks today. Similar idea, obviously a lot less sophisticated. And, and what Matt and I would do, and then ultimately Susan Sanford, who I actually did interview and hire, we'd spot the show with Tom. Tom would say all the sound effects he wants. We'd go pull the libraries, and a lot of the old stuff Ben Bird and Gary Rydstrom had recorded. So we had these 1/4-inch tapes, and we'd go spool them up and like, okay, we want that door closed and that creak. And we can't use that tape. That's the Wookiee tape, so you can't use that. That's off limits. That's in the special cabinet. And we'd set them up. So we had all this stuff. We're starting to work on the shows. I had to write some code to translate the edit decision list from the edit droid, which was not compatible with the Post Pro. So I'm sitting there writing software code to take in their text files and spit them out in something we can read so that we could queue up the dialogue. And so anyway, so it's like a Wednesday, and they're like, everybody's working this weekend because on Monday the execs are coming. And I mean, for all I know, it was Bob Iger at that point. He was head of ABC at that point.
Right.
And they want to see footage. And so we basically cut a reel of whatever we had. And so there was some of the pilot, there was some of London. There was, what else was there? Some of the war stuff was done. So I think, Verdun, I think some of Verdun was available, and so it was like a potpourri of like love scenes, moody indie, and just special effects and sound effects and temp music.
Can you, for our listeners, because there's a lot, we're talking about a lot of technology.
Yeah.
Can you sort of describe?
Well,
no, it's all right, but like when you're doing this, you're on a computer? Yeah. Is it like sort of a CRT ray computer? Is there a giant projector screen, or there were no digital projectors then, right? So what was that environment like, the working environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the computer itself was a Mac. I think it was a Mac 2 back then, which had recently come out, was color. So that was helpful because the multi-track editor was in color and, obviously could provide more information than just a monochrome display. A standard keyboard, as I said, a Casio or something more sophisticated but a pro level MIDI board, and then with a MIDI connection to the computer, and then you could load sound effects across the keyboard, or you can actually load music and all that sort of stuff. And then actually just a Sony Trinitron, one of those big Sony cubes that are sort of famous today, CRT. I think they're like, 13 inches? I mean, it wasn't very
not big. Yeah. So you were able to play back on that and map your, much like you said, like a Pro Tools today, map your sound to the timeline and play that back on the TV. Is that what you showed or what someone showed the executives? Were they watching it on the Trinitron?
Oh, no. We then went into one of the one of the mix studios. So Skywalker Sound at that point, and I haven't been there for about 5-6 years, maybe longer. There were 2 large edit suites, mixing suites, like where Jurassic Park was mixed and things like that, and the re-releases of Star Wars and things and whatnot. In fact, I think the last time I went up actually was they were remastering Raiders, and Ben Burt wanted a bunch of people who knew the movie because he had gone back to the original mix and had sort of updated it and wanted feelings and opinions about it, which was really cool. So we had then 2 smaller studios, one of which was built for Young Indy because we wanted it more TV sized. So we mixed there that was a projection screen. And then I can't remember. I want to say that they over in the main house, which is where George's office is, and the edit studios were. There was a small screening room. I believe they watched in there. I wasn't invited to the screening. They weren't. I was not invited to that.
Were they dubbing back to film, or what was the medium on which this would have been?
Pathway. So it was shot on 16, and those were transferred to Laserdisc.
Oh wow!
And those lasers. So what they would do is how the digital editing worked was they'd basically create 4 laser discs of the footage, and then have slaved. Probably Pioneer or Sony Laserdisc players, and that way you could get instantaneous editing without having to recue the disc, and even do crossfading and things like that, because the footage was all duplicated. And maybe it was 2 was enough, and then you had 2 sets of things and whatnot. That would create the edit list. They would then spin that out to tape, I think to U-matic 3/4 inch tape, which you could then which had time code and all those sort of things that we needed. And could control from the post-pro, and then they'd go back and conform the negative.
But if you were going to show someone a reel, you cut together, you'd play it off the tape, most likely.
You played off the tape, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
I mean, you can sit in the edit bay and watch a live edit like you can off Avid today, but typically you wouldn't bring someone there. George would sit there. I mean, George would sit there with the editors and go this, try that, do this, do what, whatnot. And then, but for playback, we'd play it back off of a tape.
Gotcha.
Yeah. They were mastered on Super Betamax.
Okay.
The professional Betamax. That's actually was the 4 with the 4 tracks. You had 2 tracks was the stereo English mix, and then the M&E, the music and effects track was tracks 3 and 4, which we then would send over for dubbing. So they would drop in, the foreign language track, because the show was dubbed to a number of different languages.
I love that you brought up the tracks, because I said I was going to ask you this question. At the end of every episode, in the credits, it says mastered in Dolby Surround, which is fantastic. Yeah. But when I watched the DVD, and I used to have a receiver that could tell me what the tracks were, it only comes in as 2-channel. So is there a surround mix out there for these episodes somewhere that has not been released?
We as I recall, and we would pre-master the music, so that would go to tape. So go through the edit process and then go to tape. But then actually, maybe even I'm wrong about that. Everything was played live from the post-pros. So we would basically we had one for each edit room, and then there was one on the stage. And so yet another job for Matt and Susan and I was, Larry's reel is up, go get Larry's backup file and load it. So, we're going to hit, go at 1 p.m. So you have 15 minutes to go get this project file loaded, because we don't, stage time is expensive time, even at, when you own the stage. And so anyway, so that's where that would come from. So which allowed us to actually do edits on the fly. We could actually edit on the stage, and if it was a little bit more complicated, we'd go on further in the reel and then come back and then reload the project file and be like, okay, now do this section. But it was being laid down on 16 or 24 inch tracks. And then so we laid down a 5, I can't remember if it was a 5.1 or just a 5.0 mix. That would be collapsed to an LTRT, and that's what went on the master tapes. So for those who don't know, an LTRT, a left total and a right total, which has the phasing information, so it should decode from stereo to Dolby Surround if you decode it that way, but if you play it back in just stereo or mono, it will correctly steer and not kind of brighten it too much or something like that.
But it does sound like there was, so you just said there was a 5.0 mix done and then compressed.
Definitely.
So theoretically, if it still exists in the archives, I guess, this is something that could still be utilized at some point.
Yeah, if they wanted to go back. I mean, the problem with Young Indy, which is why we haven't seen Blu-rays of it, I believe, partly it's popularity, right? It has a following like us, and particularly if you were in that generation that either watched it live or discovered it as part of your Indiana Jones fandom or George Lucas fandom or Disney fandom at this point. And this thing would go on and off. They'd be on Netflix occasionally and on Amazon, and now they're on the Disney Plus. I think they're still up there. And
yeah, they are.
Now, what I don't know, because I was only there very briefly for the re-editing of the shows. So each show was basically an hour-long episode of a month and a year in Young Indy's life. And then those, with the exception of some of the specials like the Movie of the Week or Chicago, which Harrison appeared in, it was the last minute. We actually shot the George Hall version of that. There are somewhere that footage exists with old Indy. And then to help ratings, Harrison Ford was convinced or paid a lot of money or both. That's why it's in the snow, because he wouldn't leave Wyoming for the holidays, and he was in between shooting parts of The Fugitive, which also explains why he has a beard.
Right.
Because
it's a great beard. He looks fantastic.
Yeah, Dr. Kimball at that time. And it does look great. It looks fantastic. I mean, he's Harrison Ford, so he can do whatever he wants, and we just applaud. And so, but most of it was single episodes, things like that. And then they went back as the show moved to the Family Channel, and then was going to be released eventually on DVD. And actually, it came out on VHS and then on DVD. They were recombined. So in some cases, like Verdun and Somme in August of 1916, and Germany, actually, they all kind of go together. Actually, I guess Verdun was combined with the Mata Hari episode and Paris 1916, and then Somme and Germany were combined into getting caught in the trenches and then escaping from a big prison. And so they made sense. There actually is interestingly in this, there was going to be a third episode that tied to that sequence. I know we're jumping around again, which because you see the end of that episode sort of in homage to The Great Escape, and he's off on a motorcycle at the end. He then goes to Berlin, and and so it was in the list of season 3 episodes that we got that were written, I think, but never shot. And so there was actually a third part to that. So anyway, they got combined, and I'm wondering in that combination if they didn't mix in surround. I wonder if they just stayed in stereo at that point.
That's what it seems like from at least the DVD, the actual AC3 files on the DVD. But I could see them doing that for cost, I guess. And that was sort of my question. You said you weren't there very long. What visibility into that process did you have, the recombination?
Well, I was aware we were going to start doing that, and I had started to see some of the linking footage because they started to append in season 2 the bridges that would make episodes make sense, which otherwise, other than a fade out and a fade in, sort of didn't form an Indiana Jones and some sort of, MacGuffin or adventure and whatnot. I got myself fired, basically. So I wasn't there for that.
Well, how did you get yourself fired? What did you do?
Yeah, something, it's going to come off like I'm the hero of my own story. One, I was 25, so relatively easy to get yourself fired if you're obnoxious and 25. Or I wasn't fired as much as I wasn't continued. To be fair, what happened is that we get the word that Young Indy is not going to be renewed for season 3, and there's some delay between doing these DVDs and the Family Channel stuff coming, and they actually needed to shoot 3 more episodes to kind of make it all make sense, which is why Corey Carrier, for example, ages very quickly mid TV movie. And okay, so I got to find a gig. I'm a sound editor. I'm paid by the week. Which is its own adventure, how I actually became an assistant sound editor in the union versus non-union. And at that time, quiz show, if you remember the Robert Redford film about the scandal of a quiz show, John Turturro and Ray Fiennes are in this, Robert Redford directed. And what happened was there was cheating in the late 50s. And Charles Van Damme is who Ray Fiennes plays. And it's a real story, a true story. Somehow I got in a conversation with Michael Silvers, who's our dialogue editor, who was moving over to work for Richard Himes, famous for being the co-supervising sound editor on Raiders, or the supervising sound editor on Raiders, to cut this. And they shot the TV sets of Quiz Show as if it was a TV show, 4-camera. And you had a camera on each booth. You had a wide shot, and I guess that would move around to get reactions. And then you actually had a shot in the director, kind of control room, and they would shoot each, part of that as if it was continuous. So it was like, almost like a play, right, where you would have all the actors playing in live, and you stay in character, even if the camera is not going to keep you. What that produced was 4-track dialogue based on each camera's position, and each camera had a boom operator and a mic, or I think that they were in tubes in the quiz show, the original quiz show. They were actually put in like tubes somehow to keep them from cheating, which didn't work, and that had the microphone. what Redford had told the folks as they were editing on film, as you know, sort of traditionally editing, but they wanted the flexibility to like, well, what if we recut a quiz show section? We want to be very quickly to like get the right dialogue perspectives and whatnot. So I, obnoxious 25-year-old, says to Richard and Michael, I'm like, I got a great idea. These post-pros aren't going to be used because Young Indy's going on hiatus, and you can very easily maintain all your tracks, and then you can live switch very easily. This is a perfect solution. I am your solution guru here. And they're like, that's a really good idea. We should do that. And since Michael had cut on Young Indy, he knew the technology. Richard didn't know it, but he was curious, as you know, smart and intelligent person who could see this was technology coming. My boss was out of town at the time, and I basically brokered a deal, which wasn't much more than suggesting it, and he was just livid with me. Those are not your machines. How dare you? You'll give them away. I'm like, well, I thought they were George's. And he's like yelling at me in the hallway. People are like staring at this. So we didn't, you know, as a manager now of people and having done it for many, many years, you don't actually tear down somebody in the hallway. You could take them to your office and tear them down because it's one-on-one and all that sort of stuff. So so that happened. So that was great. Now, it turned out I had pissed him off a year previously, but didn't know it. Because I asked for more money when I was editing versus assistant editing. Because like I had a young family. Isn't that what
you're supposed to do? I'm sorry, maybe.
Well, here's where I did it. I asked in front of other people, and so he never gave me another chance to edit a show. So I'd edited a bunch of shows, you know, for learning purposes, and it was like, you know, double the salary for the week. So like it was, you know, it was good money. So anyway, so then Radioland Murders is next, and I get a call the Monday of Thanksgiving week. And, you know, this is Tom. Just want to let you know that you're not going on Radioland Murders. You know, I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, you're just too independent. And, you know, I had a meeting with the supervisor, and he's like, you know, and then all the stuff came out. And it's like, why didn't you ever come to me, Laird, about this stuff? And anyway, it was done. There was a quick conversation with Rick McCallum. He's like, well, do you want to just come to North Carolina and just work on production? I'm like, sure. You know, see aforementioned family, that really wasn't going to work very well. So anyway, then I went to Sony. So it worked out. I went to Sony. I did actually, the irony of all this is I did work on Quiz Show, and they did use the machines.
So you were right, is what you're saying.
I was right. Do you want the Robert Redford story?
Yes.
Of course you do. So Robert, somewhere around here, I guess previous to this, he shot something else. Maybe River Runs Through It was being edited at the ranch. And Matt and I were going to record, or maybe it was Susan and I, were going to record tennis ball strikes because there was a tennis scene somewhere. And so we have rackets and balls, and we're just going to go out behind the building with the microphone and hit them off the wall and stuff and things like that and just get some wild sound. And we bump into Robert Redford, who's like, are there tennis courts here? Where are the tennis courts? And so we had to tell Robert that Robert is, you know, whatever. I tell Mr. Redford that in fact we were just going to record sound effects and there were no tennis courts at the ranch. And he's like, oh, that's too bad. So
he's like, I really wanted to play some tennis while we're working on this movie.
I probably should have reported that we like disappointed Robert Redford, and there probably would have been tennis courts built like a week later.
That's a great story.
I don't know if I answered your question. I wandered all over the place. I mean, I love this stuff. It was such an adventure, you know. Getting fired was such a good thing. You know, it didn't feel good at the time. But, you know, and then I missed out working probably on episode 1. So that was a bummer. Matt obviously went on to do that. Not really, I don't begrudge Matt, like as if he took my job. There was enough jobs to have. But, you know, it opened my eyes to doing other stuff and ending up in video games and things like that. So, and we need to move back to LA because, you know, something, not having your parents help you with a young kid is really hard. I know many listeners probably are, you know, may be parents and maybe not have their parents nearby, but they're really helpful when you're like trying to work 2 jobs and, you know, and take care of the kid.
Can't imagine. Kind of going back, since it sounds like you were on the show for the first 2 seasons in its entirety. Yeah. So you worked on most, I mean, you had your hands sort of on a lot of these shows.
I mean, it's a huge team, right? I mean, yes.
A lot of hands, a lot of show, but, you know. But I was just curious, like, do you have any sort of sound stories or sound work that you did on the show that you remember particularly, something special or a challenge perhaps that you had to tackle?
Well, a couple stories jump to mind. The life lesson from George. I mentioned that we had to do this emergency screening. This is October of 91 and 91, 92, 91. And so we work all night. I pulled an all-nighter. Lots of us did, so it wasn't just me. And I was given I got to do the temp music, some of which Ben had already cut, and I was kind of conforming it to the new picture edits and things like that. We had the London episode, for those who know. Indy proposes to Elizabeth Hurley. And George cast so many people who became, bigger names or were names in one way. Like Elizabeth Hurley, of course, was a very famous cover model, but hadn't really had her acting career yet. Daniel Craig is in Palestine with a terrible mustache and whatnot. And, long before we knew of his work. And so we're sitting there, and so Indy's boarding the train to go off to war. He's joined the Belgian army, and Vicky, who's his love, has said no to their engagement, but she shows up at the train station. Big romantic thing, cue 1940s, should be in black and white, frankly. And Ben has cut in The Man Who Would Be King music by Maurice Jarre, Sean Connery, Michael Caine, John Huston directed film, fantastic film, but it's the military section of it. And so it's very militaristic, which applies to, of course, Indy's going off to war, and not only Indy, but there's lots of soldiers saying goodbye and all that sort of stuff. And so I did an alternate where I played up the romance side, because I think that the end of this arc, because I've taken one screenwriting class and one acting class in film school, and I know what the heck I'm talking about. I think the end of this arc is that it shows that Vicky does care for Indy. The rejection was perhaps the impracticalities of marrying someone about to go off to war, but not that she didn't have feelings, right? She rejected the situation, which we can all relate. Well, we can't all relate to it, but we can understand. But she didn't reject the person. That feels romance to me, right? I cut in the I'm going. I want Bob Iger crying, and I want us to be approved to continue. So play it for George, and he's like, play the version Ben did, which I had re-edited to fit. And I played that, and I said, I really think, George, the scene is about this and whatnot, and this is why I went that way. And he's like, that's just an opinion. So I said, okay, then we will stick with the military sounding temp music, and thank you very much. And he was very nice about it. He was just like, that's just an opinion. And it's true.
It's accurate.
Yeah, the greatest dismissal I've ever heard.
Thomas Jefferson said opinion is power, so I just didn't know that at the time. So that was fun. I mean, that was fun and great story. But it was like it just wasn't. George was so gentle. It wasn't even off-putting. It was like, okay, great. We're just having a conversation. There's two creative people. Yeah. Yeah, there are two creative people here. George is 1.98 of the two, and I'm 0.02 of the two. More accurately, I think, to your question, and maybe making less fun of myself. One of the episodes I did get to do the sound effects on was Princeton 1916, which is in season 2. Yeah. And this episode, which features a lot of chases and a lot of car chases, it's the Nancy Drew episode. So I'll get two stories out of this, actually. And so in cutting the sound effects, we made up all those cars. And what was... Ben Burt sat down with me for like 30 minutes and sort of just schooled me on thinking about when you have two vehicles and conveying of speed and ensuring that when you think of Ben Burt, again, Academy Award-winning sound designer for all of his work, and R2-D2 and E.T., not to mention all the Star Wars films and Indy and all these other things and Pixar stuff, right? And, IMAX films, and ultimately a director, but he really understood story, and he really understood audience story. And so he really was talking about how do you differentiate it and not confuse the viewer. In fact, so the viewer always understands the relationship between the two vehicles in the chase. And it was fascinating to think about how you use speed and pitch and, how you can a lot of the stuff was shot in slow motion or shot and sped up, shot in regular motion and sped up.
Right.
How do you make that not look ridiculous? Because it can look a little Keystone Copsy, and you can use sound to do all these things. I mean, and so then basically building a library, we got some cars and, car rolls and all that sort of stuff, and then editing those into a package to give to the effects editor. I think Chris must have cut that one. And or maybe I cut it and Chris helped. I don't remember. It's all everyone just did everything. So it was like almost like a writer's room, frankly. So that was fascinating. And then we go on the stage, and George had some comments, and we fixed them and things like that. But that was a lot of fun to do, and to really realize that the cars and the chase became characters because the characters were in the car, and we didn't have a lot of there's some close-ups of them, right? But they had to be the proxy for Indy and Mark Thompson's character, who was the disgruntled scientist at working for Edison.
Where did it go? Tire tracks in the mud.
So that was great. I mean, that was like, an awesome experience, because I learned on the job, and everyone was just so nice to help me do that and whatnot. The other part of that story is almost all of the dialogue in Young Indy is replaced. Because certainly anything shooting on location in Prague and other places, you just couldn't control the sound environment. So most of it would come back unusable. The stuff in North Carolina, where a lot of stuff was shot, is more useful because the Wilmington studios were built to be sound stages. But as soon as you went outside of the Wilmington studios, there were airplanes and traffic noise and things like that. So, I'd say 75% of the dialogue was replaced, which means we had to get the actors in to record these lines. And so I was assigned both Mark Thompson, who I had to fly down to LA, at that point, a big HBO comedian, had a show on HBO, and which I had never seen because I couldn't afford HBO. So he was very miffed that I said, so what kind of other stuff have you done? He's like, you've never seen my special? I'm like, no, Mr. Thompson, I haven't. He's like, oh, and that just soured him to me for the afternoon. Oh, well. And I learned my lesson there. Look up who you're going to work with.
You mean you stole them back from the refinery?
That's right, sir.
How did he know about the refinery?
What?
We didn't tell him we were at the refinery.
Robin Lively was Nancy, was the heroine of the episode. She actually popped back up in Princeton 1918. And so Indy's high school sweetheart takes her to the prom. All those sort of things. And we spent 2 days together with a recordist doing all of her dialogue. And she must have been 21 or 22 at the time. So just very early in her career. She comes from a whole family of Livelies. She gave me the biggest hug at the end of the session, which I totally didn't expect, and was so thankful of how nice I was and helping her through and helping her get her lines right, because she had to act. And sure. It wasn't just like hit the sync points. I mean, she had to like redo her performance. And in some cases, we had notes from George and the editors like, "Oh, please change this line reading. Get her to. It's got to fit, but please take this direction or whatnot." And I'm just like, can you do this, Robin? Stuff like that.
Were you in a satellite link, or were you in?
She was live. She was live. No, we did. We had. Most of the it was fun to come to the ranch. There's some apartments there, places to stay. If they couldn't come up, we almost always set somebody to LA or to New York to record them. We did a little bit towards the end with ISDN lines, and we were able to start doing some dialogue from afar. It was still pretty nascent on that. Not like today where people are recording in their pajamas from Maine, entire animated shows, for example. But at that point, it was very much you're in the room, or if you're not in the room, you're in the booth. And, even like when I got to video games and oversaw a lot of our dialogue dialogue recording, again, with relatively famous people, in Star Trek or X-Men and things like that, or even in some of the Zork games I did where we, stunt cast, folks, we didn't even leave it to we had a voice director, but we would go be there partly for context, because usually in video games you're asking them to say a bunch of gobbledygook. It's techno-babble would be the Star Trek term, but like hit the interface button. And like Brent Spiner's like, what is that? Do I care? I'm like, no, just say the line, Brent. That's good. You're fine. So in those days it was very much live, which was good, right? You felt a connection, and and so even flying down to LA. I mean, like I actually don't know why I had to go to LA to record Mark Thompson, except for maybe context, because we certainly could have sent it down there was Skywalker Sound South at that point. And I'm sure we could have just sent it.
Where was that? I've actually don't know.
That was off Olympic Boulevard and just on the Santa Monica border. It became Lantana Sound Studios, and now it's, I think, just a general office park. I want to say like Sentinel and Olympic. Yeah,
that's great. That's
so it's like a nondescript, like kind of like office complex. It didn't, you didn't go through some big gate. It's like wasn't fun like going down to Sony lot or something.
But that's where you would go if you were going to record in LA. And if you went down to record in LA, was there any monitoring from the ranch, or was it sort of like you did the recording, you got, you sent it up, and then maybe you got notes and stuff like that?
I brought it back with me.
Got it. So if if they wanted to make changes, let's say, you would have to go back down and re-record with that person.
Yeah, and we would handle that as I don't know how much I'm creating memories versus their actual memories. Typically the way we would do that is we'd do every line a couple times. So we'd give the dialogue editors some choices in the same way that you would get, you almost rarely shoot a scene once, partly for safety, you'd shoot a second one, partly for performance. Sometimes the performance, especially if you're doing, two characters, but one's over the shoulder, one character is going to be better, and the other one, you actually want to take their dialogue from, say, their reverse, where they're on camera, and because they're a little bit, they're acting, more versus just reading the lines and whatnot. So, it'd be very rare for us, especially someone like a guest star like Mark Thompson. First of all, I assume their contracts, they only had a couple days of looping built in. For Sean Patrick Flannery, he was at the ranch sort of every 6 months, and he would just bang out episodes, because he was in Europe most of the time or in North Carolina shooting. And so he wasn't available. Occasionally we would send somebody out there with a microphone, or we'd ask the production sound person, like, we really need this line. Can you find a quiet corner and record it? And they'd send us a bunch of wild lines, and we'd edit it.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
Harrison's lines for the Chicago episode were recorded wild. Susan Sanford went to Wyoming like over Christmas with a Nagra and a microphone, and I think they were recorded in his living room.
Wow.
And so he didn't see picture. It was like, these are all the lines we need. He probably has 36 lines in his couple sequences, and I think he re-recorded them all like 3 or 4 times, and then she came back.
Well, his last read in that episode is fantastic, when he's like, things aren't how they're supposed to be or whatever. He goes, and sometimes they are. He has like that growl,
Yeah, that was all after the fact.
It's crazy to think that he was in the living room doing that.
That's where he was. Fantastic. I mean, something about, in some ways he was comfortable, right? I mean, it's like, obviously they were getting a favor from him. I have no idea what he was paid, but I'm sure it wasn't his, the fugitive film rate.
Yeah.
He's like, a couple days scale, that's it.
My understanding is that George had asked him early on, so this is maybe more rumor than it's truth, to do the old Indy sequences, and that they would, effectively promise they could shoot them all in like 7 days, right? Do everything for a season, and then he'd be done. So for whatever reason, he wasn't interested at that point, or the money wasn't right, or you couldn't schedule it because he was making, seems like 2 movies a year.
Yeah.
At that point of his career. And, right on the cusp of Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger, right? So he's, he was, I guess, done Henry and a few other sort of more ambitious parts. And then he was intermixing those with things like The Fugitive and Jack Ryan. Air Force One, that's got to be right around that time, too.
Well, thank you very much for being such pleasant company. But I have to go. Goodbye. Bye.
What was the point of all that?
I don't know. Do you?
Nope, I don't get it.
And, this is something we talk about a bit with the old Indy segments. It's like, in a way, they work great. And in other ways, they're like, it's easy to see that George kind of got rid of them when it came to re-editing the things into features. But I wanted to ask, though, about like kind of especially the dubbing aspect of it all. Like when you mentioned how Harrison was, he wasn't even seeing picture. Like how do you even approach that? I mean, are you just like, just read the lines, and then do you just like snippet out words and just place them where they need to be, or how does that even work with that?
Yeah, you've got it. I mean, I think he probably remembered. I mean, these are actors who are, particularly film and TV actors, know that the line reading has to remain the same as compared to, say, a stage actor who may actually be doing different things each night to try to explore the character more and whatnot. So once they're off, so partly I think memory. We probably had we probably brought him a cut. I want to say that we probably brought him a cut and played it on a VHS. I'd have to ask Susan if she remembers. And so he saw it, but you couldn't play it, and we didn't like have a headphones, and we didn't have a playback. So it was like, okay, you heard it. It was like 3 seconds, so that's what you get. And then at that point, you basically a little bit of speeding up the work if you need to. Lip sync, of course, is very reliant on sibilants and things like that, and other things you can kind of just slide by because the mouth isn't moving or the sound is being made in your tongue and you can't see the tongue. So It doesn't have to be perfect. You have to hit the max and things like that, and otherwise everyone's like, well, that's way out of sync. But once you hit those, you have some flexibility, and you could pretty much speed up or slow down something by about 20% and correct the pitch then. And at that point, today you can move something 50% and maintain pitch. But back then, our digital tools were only so good. In fact, as I recall, we couldn't do that live. We couldn't do those audio effects live. We'd have to go bounce those out as a record project and bring them back in and just hope it worked. So a lot of tweaking and stuff like that. I mean, if you watch the episode again, you'll see that the cabin stuff probably is most. I think we got to keep most of the cabin stuff because that was a set, and the stuff driving, it's moving so fast. Like you also get away with a ton, right? Because his mouth is moving all over the place, and And yes, again, thinking about this, it's airing on broadcast TV. You might be getting a 360p copy on your VHS, but you can't see any detail anyway. So actually far more important at that point is processing the sound to feel like it's in the car, feel like it's in a snow field, and that there's consistency between him and the chief who's in that sequence and the bad guys chasing the pipe. That actually is much more important for the listener to not be jarred. So if you're getting all that correct and the ambient and using wind in the right place and things like that to cover up where they don't match, then you can get away with fooling the ear.
Well, it was another thing we've talked about a bunch on this podcast too, was just looking at the DVDs again and like comparing the quality of the production, both visually but also sound as well, to other TV shows at the time. This seems so much more cinematic than most of the stuff that's even coming out today. I just wonder if you have any comment on that in terms of like, especially after you left the show, moved on to other projects, like how did this compare to some other TV show productions you might have been aware of at the time, or movies as well? Like, where does this sit in that?
That's a great question. I'm so glad that quality comes through. We really felt like we were doing mini movies. I mean, we really approached them that way. The first and foremost was time. We had 3 weeks to do post-production on a show. At that point, episodic TV, hour-long drama, episodic TV, so you're talking about 48 minutes approximately. There were only, I think, 4 commercial breaks at that point. We had a week. So when I went to Sony Pictures and I worked on Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, same format, a lot of action, a lot of horses, a lot of dialogue replacement because you're shooting on a Western set in LA, but there's cars and planes and other, stuff like that. We had a week, party of 5, no action, but a lot shot partly live in San Francisco. Some the outdoor external stuff was shot in San Francisco, and then the stage was actually behind the sound building, so you could just go see their house. And again, 4 days. edit Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We mix on Friday, shows in the can. Interestingly, the half-hour stuff, so I worked on Mad About You, which was a blast. I got to meet Paul Reiser and Helen Hunt, and they were so nice. Particularly, Paul Reiser was a producer on the show, or executive producer on the show, and so he was very much involved. We also had a week, so that was nice, because that was half the length, and we could do, especially as a comedy, you'd want to push comedy across all levels, which took a little bit more time than doing relatively straightforward Walker, Texas Ranger, a gunshot and a kick down a door. And, and it's Chuck Norris being Chuck Norris, again, fantastic. And I got to meet him, and he was super nice. I've seen signs at marathons, because I run marathons, that say Chuck Norris never ran a marathon. If that guy wanted to run a marathon, he could run a marathon.
He'd run a marathon.
So
Absolutely.
He still can, too. I hope he has, actually. Proved those people wrong. So having 3 weeks was luxurious. And that's my first job. So I think this is the norm. So I learned this afterwards. I'm like, what? And Party of Five, it was every other reel. It was the other thing we did in Young Indy, which is if you had the show, you had from the pop of the 2 all the way through the end credit fade out, and which means you had continuity. So our sound editors, our dialogue editors, our music editors worked on a whole show together. And when I got to say Party of Five, I split a show with another editor. So I had every other reel. So I'd have like 1 and 3, and the person would have 2 and 4. And often I would have to go ask, I'm like, because I didn't see it. I'm like, I'm on reel 3. What happened at the end of reel 2? And is it continuous? And did it rain? Because it's San Francisco. Because I need to know if I put in wet car tires or dry car tires. I mean, that kind of minutia, but you wanted, the continuity and whatnot. At one point, the supervisor said to me, he's like, oh, just cut them both in. We'll decide when we mix. I'm like, oh, it was a complete turnoff. That's what chased me to video games. I'm like, this is terrible. This is not art. We just made epic movies. We made Lawrence of Arabia on a weekly basis, and occasionally Bridge Over the River Kwai. That's what we were doing on Young Indies. That's how we felt about it. From a production value point of view, obviously shooting on location, bringing in some of the actors, which is a who's who of Star Wars, Indiana Jones. But Max von Sydow is in an episode, right? And as I mentioned, Elizabeth Hurley, who George, was on the cusp of discovering, and Anne Heche, may she rest in peace, having just passed away, in an episode. And I said Daniel Craig in an episode, and these are like a spotting of talent by George and his casting folks was incredible. So we had a level and since you had effectively a new cast every week, other than Indy and Remy, or Indy and Dad and Mom and Miss Seymour in the younger episodes, that you had to have a quality level that could match. And I think that's one of the reasons why people took these shows. I suspect that they were not paid a lot. It was the prestige payment, right? You're on a George Lucas TV show, and you're in a famous thing, and it's going to be great, and everyone's going to love you. And so that was so it started with the acting, right? And then part of the benefit of editing digitally was, again, if you have to edit a show on film, which is how a lot, or tape to tape, which is how a lot of TV was edited at the time, you're just run out of time, because you're dealing with the logistics of transport of the tape mechanism, and you can't do. What would it be like if what if we flipped the scene? Like what happened in the film? It's a little easier, right? Because you literally just go clip it out and put it in a different order, and of course today we just drag it and it's done. And so there was more experimentation time, and then we got to the sound side, and we actually could go record sound effects. Like there was a budget to go do that, and we could, and of course we were sitting on this library of the greatest sound effects library in the world by Ben Burt and Gary Rydstrom and other folks, and and then we can use that for basis of sounds, and we could get the production people to record stuff for us. Like, hey, okay, get that car, for example. If it's a real, if it's a period piece, not a made up car, we'd ask them to go, and they'd love that. And oh, here's a wild reel of sound. Do what you want with it. Yeah. Everybody cared a lot. I mean, I think that's really was apparent, from George on down. I mean, it wasn't, he put a lot into it. I think that the, frustrations he had about the audience not showing up, but we needed MacGyver. It was a MacGyver budget. We needed MacGyver-like numbers. You need to be a top 5 show in the ratings. And we were, top 15 initially, and then it sort of fell from there.
Do you know what the episodic budget of that show, of Indiana Jones, was?
It was like $1 million an episode is my memory, which was unheard of at the time. It was crazy, but look at all the production. It's in there. But it's on the screen. That's right. I think it's fair to say it's on the screen. Yeah. And it's in Bob Iger's book. If you guys have read Ride of a Lifetime, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
When he retired for the first time from Disney, and he relates that the reason George brought Lucasfilm to Disney, the only studio he shopped the company to, was because the loyalty ABC had shown him on Young Indy. Because Young Indy probably had no business making a second season from a business point of view.
Yeah.
And yet ABC supported it through the 2 seasons. While George was getting experience with digital editing and getting ready for episode 1, this wasn't a throwaway show. He's smart enough though not to spend his own money. I will give him credit for that. He got ABC to pay for it. Yeah,
good for him.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk a bit about like the collab. I mean, you've mentioned this many times, how with specifics, but I wonder if you could talk in general about like the collaboration for the show. I mean, specifically with George, but like how involved were people from Lucasfilm who maybe aren't even on the credits, who are just like, how involved was Lucasfilm as a company with this show? Because I think there is this sort of like public perception that like, oh, George was just like chilling from the period of like 83 to 99 or whatever. And it's like, no, he's an incredibly busy person. And like, it feels like from what we've learned so far is like Lucasfilm's full energy was just being put into this series. I wonder if you can comment on that.
Yeah. As a Lucasfilm alumni, the gratitude I feel to George and to other people there, and Ben, it's almost hard to state. This was my first job. Some obnoxious kid from LA who was very fortunate to like computers and sound. I met my wife while living up there still today. So I grew up there. So I am very colored in my response. But you're right. Everyone was involved. Starting with, you haven't credited the writers. I mean, Frank Darabont worked on this show, right? And a bunch of other folks, who Frank Darabont, of course, became an amazing director and whatnot, and other people too. And the credits are, people again spotting talent, and those folks going on to do tremendous things in the industry, often not with George. And so there'd be writers. We saw the writers' conferences. They'd come in. Starting with the library. Lucasfilm had an infamous, because of the stories around Return of the Jedi and Marcia Lucas and the stained glass in this library. But the research library that exists and existed and the team that would research these eras, and we go talk to them like, hey, what are we working on? Oh, you're working on New York. I'm like, could Indy meet George Gershwin? That'd be so cool. He was in New York around that time, and they're like, yeah, we're on top of it. We know Laird was there at that point, and it's nice that you're a George Gershwin fan. Good for you. So I can't take any credit for George Gershwin and New York Follies. But I was so thrilled when it happened. And so they produced reams of material of what was going on in the world, what were the timelines, what were the human events, where it was going on in World War I, because a lot of stuff was in World War I. That would go to the writers. They'd have writers' conferences for 1 or 2 weeks at the ranch. You'd see all these folks march in. So starting in that process, George would oversee those meetings. That would create the treatments and the storylines, the timelines. They had Indy's life, I think, mapped out from 5 years age. Actually, it was going to be Princeton 1899 or 1900 with like toddler Indy on the roof getting into misadventures. And then there was a 5-year-old Indy episode, which never got made. And then I think they took it out to 25 or 26. Like Belloc was planned, young Belloc and things like that, which they never got to, unfortunately. And then it would go out to be casted and filmed, and there were humongous crews. And, Rick McCallum, that was mainly his area to oversee, because George typically didn't go out. But occasionally he would watch, they would have a video tap, and he could actually watch episodes being filmed remotely. But then if you think about the directors, Simon Windsor, who is an Australian director, directed many, many, many things, including The Light Horseman, which is sort of the happy sequel to Gallipoli about the Australian light horse, and then brought that episode and turned it into Young Indy in Palestine. And literally we were like cutting footage out of his movie and sound effects out of his movie and putting in a TV show. And many other directors. I think, did Frank Oz do an episode? I want to say Frank Oz, maybe not. He was already doing feature stuff. But somebody like that, that was doing feature things. I think an equivalent, by the way, in terms of this, although I didn't work on it, I think would be Amazing Stories from the 80s.
Sure. Yeah.
Where you had this amazing talent coming through under Spielberg's auspices and, across all the disciplines. And again, one-off episodes and things like that. And so anyway, very collaborative. So then George would be very involved. He'd come watch the edits. He'd watch the mixes. He'd have feedback. He was there all the time. His kids would be running around and whatnot on Saturdays at the ranch. It was great. They'd come barging into the room and, "What are you doing, Laird?" "Oh, I'm working." "Oh, okay, cool. Good to see you." I think that Katie was 5. Katie Lucas. So very family. So my point of that is it was a very family thing. We have an annual family picnic. Being on the Lucasfilm side, I got to go to 2 Christmas parties because there was the ILM, the production film party, and then there was a smaller Lucasfilm party at the ranch that George would host. And so you didn't feel like you were working a job. You felt like this was a family thing. And you've heard stories and read stories about how Indy was done in Story Conference, and those transcripts exist and things like that. And it's just a bunch of his buddies sitting around and brainstorming movies. Hal Barwood, for example, and folks like that. And of course, Philip Kaufman and, other folks like that who were in and out. And hopefully my last name drop, right? But Robin Williams would just come to lunch and sit and hold court in the tech building. Wow. Again, rest his soul. And again, super nice, very friendly. But Robin Williams is sitting at the next table telling jokes, and Linda Ronstadt's horses were at the ranch.
Why were her horses at the ranch?
Well, they were
she dated George.
In the 90s, as late as 1991.
No, it wasn't that late.
Okay,
but okay. I think they ended in Friends.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Melody wasn't in the picture yet.
It's very under the table, Dan.
Well, if we're going to talk about it, let's talk about it.
I'm probably in such trouble. I have there's no good gossip. I didn't walk in on anybody, thankfully. I wouldn't know what to do with that. So everyone was very involved. In terms of other things that were going on at that time, Star Wars was in early development, very, very hush-hush, but we knew it was coming. So George was probably writing his updated, saga stuff himself, maybe getting a little bit of help. ILM was very busy on a ton of things, not just Young Indy. So in ILM, I think ILM did a lot of their visual effects in video. Actually, I think another reason why I've started to say why we don't have Blu-rays and 5 mixes is like with the Star Trek Next Generations and original series, that we did get up-resed, and recreated special effects, but like DS9 and Voyager have not been done because probably the money doesn't pay off for Paramount. I think it's a limiting factor in Young. And you'd have to just up-res that footage, I guess, and just hope it looks okay. Because you can go back to the 16 millimeter for the other stuff. That will look great. But anyway, so everyone was very involved. THX was booming at that point with their theater program. And then there were other shows being cut. You're working and, Gary Rydstrom comes out and says, "Who wants to watch Reel 5 of Jurassic Park? We just finished the mix." Okay, I'll walk across the hallway. I've been wondering what all that loud noise was coming from that door. And, you're watching the raptor chase and giving notes, and it was very collaborative that way. And so if somebody wanted to come in and see something, you spooled it up and you're like, "What do you think?" And if someone said, I don't like it, here's what's wrong with it. You're like, "Oh, that's okay. That's a good note."
You didn't say that's an opinion? Because you didn't.
No, I'd say that now, but
it just it feels like such the environment that we all kind of dream of when we go to film school.
Yeah,
I went to AFI too, and it's just a time where you want to enter into a community like what George had.
Yeah, I think it comes out of the America Zoetrope, Coppola's work. I think that was why Northern California became the home to these independent filmmakers who wanted to just, coming out of Hollywood New Wave, if you look historically, right, the birth of the independent filmmaker in the 60s, coming out of the French New Wave, in many ways influenced the Italian New Wave, all these influencing basically film geeks, some of whom we went to school and who didn't. I'm like, well, I have a camera. I mean, Peter Bogdanovich would fall into this category, even though he was, fascinated with Hawks and Ford and other, studio filmmakers, and then goes and shoots targets in the Last Picture Show, kind of on the sly to some extent, coming out of his Roger Corman experiences. So I think all of that influenced not only like, hey, we can not only break the rules because we don't have to go through some sort of big, approval process, American Graffiti and THX 1138, being, and Star Wars, original Star Wars, were all shot very independently. Although, of course, Fox backing in Star Wars was crucial to keep the money rolling. But, we can make up our rules. We can work with whomever we want to work with. And we can do so in a way that respects everyone's contributions. It was George's show. I mean, don't get me wrong. And we respected that. And it was, he built that and gave us our childhoods and many things like that. But he never lorded that over you, and nobody felt that way. Everyone was like, oh, I'm just trying to make something really good.
It's great. That's wonderful to hear.
Right. And again, I'm looking back with 30 plus years of rose-colored glasses. I'm sure it was terrible. I don't know what I'm talking about. I have to ask some real people. No, in the people I still am friends with, it's very nostalgic to think about those days.
Because you've since then, I mean, in addition to your Hollywood work, films, video games, etc., as you've mentioned, you've also done a lot of podcasts as well, and you've done a lot of work in some other Indiana Jones podcasts. The IndyCast comes to mind, but also you do the BondCast. I
love the BondCast, by the way. It's my favorite. It's my favorite Laird podcast right there.
Oh, thank you. We may eventually get through all the films.
No, I love it. It's nice. You just wait. It's it's there. It's coming. It's never going to end.
Someday. The podcast stuff came about. Really because of the IndyCast and the birth of podcasts in the early 2000s, and I hadn't done a lot of. Ironically, once I went to make video games, while I was hiring a bunch of sound people and we worked with the people who had done the first Medal of Honor, and then they became Call of Duty's team, and they wanted Michael Giacchino to come over as their composer. And I'm like, okay, I'll make a deal with Michael Giacchino. I have no idea who this person is or that he'll be a famous Academy Award winner someday. So, okay, I called his agent. We made a deal, and he did the music for us, and it was amazing. And then he went on to be the Pixar. Him and Randy Newman are like the Pixar composers, right? And of course, Spider-Man and Jurassic World and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, but I didn't do much hands-on. I wasn't editing. I managed our music department at one point. I was on Guitar Hero for many years, and so involved in stuff. I have no musical background. I tried to learn the piano when I was 20. It was terrible. It is my retirement project. So I can retire and be terrible again, but nobody will care. But I love music. I love particularly film music, and film music leads me to classical music and to other forms. And this is all from Star Wars. And frankly, actually, Superman is the John Williams origin story because my cousin, this is the benefit of growing up around Hollywood. My cousin went to an all-girls school. One of the producers had a daughter there. He had a fundraiser. Everyone can pay money, go see Superman at the Warner Brothers lot. I was so disappointed the screening room was so small. I'm like, this is tiny. Anyway, but they gave us the 2 LP John Williams album as part of our little gift, and a big poster of Christopher Reeve flying, which I still have, and things like that, and a little pin and things like that. Wow. So I'm like, get the album, which I don't even have a record player. My parents do. I got one a couple years later. I'm like, I wish it was on cassette. This would be so much more convenient. And I'm like, John Williams, wait a minute. He did Star Wars. And so it's like all of a sudden that person became a name. And so this love of music and sound, besides the sort of technology aspects of it, came, I think, really from that. And I happen to have a very strong auditory training and that I developed. Like, my wife will I'll hear something, and 30 minutes before my wife hears it on the street, I'm like, oh, that's that, and that's that, and it's like that. She's like, how do you hear that? I'm like, I don't know, I just hear it. I'm in my 50s. I'm sure I've lost, the upper octave and a half of my sound, but it's well trained. So flash forward, I'm not doing anything with this experience, although I love it. And I'm like just searching for, I'm like, kind of like, what's this podcast thing that these kids are talking about these days? And I'm like, well, I wonder if it's an Indiana Jones podcast. I must have found Rebel Force Radio. It wasn't called that. I must have found, what was the original show?
The Forcecast.
Yeah.
Forcecast. I must have found the Forcecast. And then I found the IndyCast, which was in the Forcecast feed. And I'm like, oh, there's an Indiana Jones podcast. This is probably, Crystal Skull must have come out. So it was right after that. And Ed Dollister, who created the IndyCast, started around November of 2007. So the IndyCast, to plug that, is absolutely one of the longest continuous running podcasts ever, right? This is 2023. We are approaching 16 years, which is amazing. And without ads. Like it doesn't even go, I don't know what happens if you play it on a traditional player, but there's no ad revenue. It's just a labor of love. The first episode, I think, was 5 minutes long or something like that. And I think the most recent one was over 3 hours. Thank goodness they're monthly. And so the show comes, I started listening to the show. I'm like, oh, this is enjoyable. And they've got a good attitude about it. And they obviously love the material. And I sent an email to Ed and I said, hey, I love what you're doing. And, I worked on Young Indy. And if you ever want to talk about Young Indy, because I think at that point, no one had talked about Young Indy on the show, I'd love to talk about it because I'm still proud of what we did. And I don't even think the DVDs were out yet in 2007. No, they came out in the
first one came out. The first one came out at the end of the year.
Maybe this is why I picked it. I'm like, oh, these just came out and let's talk about them. That's right. They came out in 3 volumes. So Ed was like, oh my goodness, you worked on the show. We can't get anybody who's worked on the show. I mean, since we've had John Rhys-Davies and Karen Allen and everybody but sort of Harrison Stephen and John Williams and George Lucas. But so that's been great. And I said, yeah, of course, I'll be happy. How's this work? And he's like, have you ever heard of Skype? I'm like, nope. He's like, okay, well, download this. And okay, and get a microphone, okay. And all right, so we did that and recorded, it was September, I want to say. So we're on some anniversary of that now, 15 years maybe,
wow.
16 years. And so that was fun, right? I mean, I got to tell stories like you guys are asking. You're very kind to want to know about this stuff.
History wants to know about this, Laird. History.
Thank you. We'll see about that. Maybe we'll all write a book about it. It needs a book, actually. So I'm continuing to listen to the show, and there was some trivia stuff that I would contribute to occasionally, and I think I did a top 10 list. One of the show contributors, Ron Longo, he had Ron's Reviews or something like that at the time as a segment, and he did here's 6 great John Williams pieces of music, I think from Indy. And he put it in the show. So I heard it, heard the episode, didn't know it was coming, heard the episode, but Ed had to release everything in mono. And because of the Forcecast network bandwidth, as well as just, nobody needed stereo in podcasts at that point. So I'm like, well, wait a minute, this kind of sucks. We're not hearing this music in stereo. So I said to Ed, I wrote Ed and I said, would you be okay with me taking that piece and re-editing it in stereo and then putting a wrapper around it, and then you release it as a John Williams thing? It's just one-off. And he's like, oh, I'm kind of interested in that. Here's Ron's email. Check with Ron to make sure he's okay with it, and send it to me. So pinged Ron, and I'm like, and he had heard my interview, so he sort of knew who I was. And he said, yeah, if you want to, go for it. And fortunately, Ron had done it in a way that I could very cleanly cut out his dialogue from the music and then put the music back in stereo, which I did. And then I recorded kind of a wrapper sort of explaining what we had done and adding my 2 favorites in. And we put it out, and actually the fan response, for our little IndyCast, was very positive. And Ed happened to call it The Magic of John Williams. And was like, that's a good name. And so Ron listened to it and he said, this was great. I loved it. Do you want to record it? Should we do this for real? I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm game for it. What do you want to do? And so we came up with sort of some, I don't remember what we talked about in the IndyCast John Williams Special 2. We'd have to go look it up. I don't remember. And it was just a couple fans talking about John Williams music and playing some tunes. And so I do a bunch of research. I mean, when early on in the days of this, all of my like, oh my God, I'm editing. This is so great. I love this. I'm feeling like I'm editing, and I don't have to deal with picture, so that makes things a lot easier. And I can move things around. And if we flub it, we can cut it. Or occasionally we'd say something that was wrong. Like just the recent episode, I said when we recorded that John Williams just conducted in Japan a couple concerts. And which actually one of them was put on the Deutsche Grammophon streaming platform, so you could watch it. And I said, I don't know that John Williams has ever been to Japan before. And then while I'm editing it, I'm like, I should fact check that. I'm not sure about that. I knew he hadn't been to Berlin when he did that, whatever. So oh yes, he took the Boston Pops 30 years ago to Japan. And so he's definitely been to Japan. Out went that. Cut that out. So no one pings me and says like, you bozo, how do you know John Williams didn't, go in 1993 to Japan with the Boston Pops? So we do that, and we really have a good time. But I was very scripted at that point. I would like write out everything I was going to say, and we'd have a real like show order and flow, and then over the years it evolved to we basically have a theme. We kind of know what we're going to talk about because we want to do the pre-listening, and like on BondCast, it's really easy because we're going into the Bond order. So how BondCast came about, so we just do this, and it's just fun and things like that. When Jimmy and Jason from, at that point, the Force Cast announced they're going to do BondCast with Jason, who was the Star Trek editor of magazine or something like that at the time, or Star Wars, then he went to Star Trek.
Jonathan Wilkins. What
did I say, Jason? Yeah. Jonathan Wilkins, who's great. I've met him. We actually caught up once. I've never actually met Jimmy or Jason Swank, Jimmy Mack or Jason Swank in person. We've always missed each other. I've met everybody on the IndyCast at this point around the world and whatnot, which is great. So I pinged Jimmy and I said, or maybe pinged them both or all three of them, and said, hey, you just did this great special on Dr. No and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, but we can't separate James Bond movies from their music. They always have an incredible recording artist for the song, all these John Barry scores, but yet you have Bill Conti and Margaret Hamlish and now David Arnold at that point and things like that. What do you think about a show just on the music of each movie? And I sent some links to some stuff we had done, and Jimmy liked it. He's like, let's try one. Are you ready to do Dr. No? I'm like, I'm ready to do Dr. No. And so we record it, and he's like, what do you want to call it? I'm like, For Your Ears Only, because of For Your Eyes Only.
I love that. That's so good.
And we had a great time doing it, and Jimmy's very knowledgeable and stuff like that. But I'm kind of the more like, my job is to do all the research, because there's always drama on the songs. That's what makes the BondCast fun, is like there was always somebody who was going to do the song and then they were cut at the last minute, or the composer wrote a song but the producers didn't like it, or the producers didn't realize that the song is really about that part of the body and not what the words say, and things like that. And so it and then of course the Bond theme is so iconic. You could do the same thing for the Mission Impossible films, actually, even though there's less of them, because of the way that the Lalo Schifrin thing is used. The kind of couple things that I'm most proud of that we've done. One, we've gotten the chance to interview people like Anna-Sophie Mutter, who's recorded with John Williams, really has actually, I think, inspired these last 5-6 years of creativity from John Williams through her asking, and she was married to Andre Previn, a very good friend of John Williams, briefly for about 4 years, but they remained friends. And then he basically encouraged her to reach out to John Williams. They're like, why don't you take some of those film tunes and turn them into like 5-minute Paganini types of virtuoso music? And he's now written a violin concerto for her and other pieces and things like that. So we got to interview her. Just a big fan. Okay, here's like one of the premier violinists in the world. This was someone who was discovered by Herbert von Karajan in the Berlin Philharmonic as a 13-year-old out of Bavaria, right? This is, up there with Hilary Hahn and James Ennis and other people. This is Anna friggin' Sophie Mutter, right? And she is telling us how she's weeping watching War Horse on her laptop on tour in Australia, and mainly because of John Williams' music. And so that's those kind of moments are amazing. We got to talk to Keith Lockhart. That's fantastic. He's the conductor of the Boston Pops, succeeded John Williams, and things like that. So bringing those stories out, even to our limited audience, is great. The other thing that was a lot of fun, which was unrelated to music, but related very much to indie fandom, because you talked upon indie fandom. When I was at Activision in the late 90s, I popped my head into this conference room, and then this looks like Raiders of the Lost Ark, but very much not like Raiders of the Lost Ark. What is this? And Chris Strambola and Eric Zala, who are QA testers, created the Indiana Jones fan movie, where as teenagers in Mississippi, they shot over 4 summers, basically shot for shot, recreated Raiders of the Lost Ark and Steel vs. Sissies, whatever. But the point in 1997, 1998, when I saw this, they were just a couple fanboys who worked in video games like me, showing this to a bunch of people who were like, "You made that? Wow, that's pretty cool." It was all grainy and all that sort of stuff. They went on to, they couldn't shoot the flying wing sequence of Raiders because it was just way out of their, they found a submarine in Alabama. So they were able to get a submarine for that sequence. But the flying wing was they just skipped it. So they're going to do a Kickstarter and to actually create a flying wing and now go back as adults and create this footage that's going to go sit in the middle of teenagers, and whatnot. And so, of course, I backed this, and they invited me out and let me be an extra on the movie. So I'm a good old German soldier who's mowed down for my 0.8 of a second on film. And but what I said, if I'm going to come out there, what I'd love to do, because they brought back a lot of their friends from the 80s. This is early 2000s. No, it must be late. No, it's later. What am I talking about? Because it's after Oculus. It's Kickstarter, right? This is 2010. I said, you give me permission to go interview people, do audio interviews with people, get their reminiscences and talk about it and whatnot. And they said, sure. I mean, obviously, if anyone doesn't want to be interviewed, don't, hound them. I'm like, no, of course not. It's totally opt-in. Nobody didn't want to do it. And then I was able to cut a 2-part audio documentary of behind the scenes of this. And that was just, that was the culmination of documentary filmmaking and audio editing and storytelling. So it's the opportunity to do that, just because I like to hang out with a bunch of people who talk about Indiana Jones in this medium, is what a gift.
It's like having a personal director's commentary that's interactive. You can ask questions and you can engage with it. It's really fantastic.
That's the legacy. And so the podcasting, and I've gotten better, I think, at it, and I think the edits are better, and I think the technology is better, and all that sort of stuff. I think we're entertaining people. I mean, obviously, with the Dial of Destiny coming out, it's sort of breathed new life into the interest in Indiana Jones for 10 days. And don't get me started on Disney marketing. But happily, we can tell, if we'd done this a month ago before the streaming had started, I would have just been completely miserable. Actually, I see the streaming numbers have been quite good.
Yeah, I saw that the purchasing, because it's not on Disney Plus yet, but the sales are quite good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I remember I literally so I got invited to the premiere, which was amazing, and I'm at the premiere, and the Uber driver says, "Why are you here?" Not at the premiere, but I'm at the hotel, and I said, "Oh, I'm here for the premiere of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny." And he's like, "Oh, there's a new Indiana Jones film coming out?" Okay, the thing opens in 2 weeks. There's a billboard behind him at Hollywood and Highland. It's right there, folks. If he just looked around, right? But we all ignore those sort of things. I'm like, yeah, it's coming out on the 30th of June, and it's something like the 12th of June when this conversation happened. So there you go. That's your problem, right? I bet if I had asked him, "Are you going to see Barbie and Oppenheimer?" he would have said yes to both. Although at that point, Barbenheimer, I don't think it didn't become a thing until July 5th or something. But
that one killed Mission Impossible. I don't know.
Did.
Indiana Jones was a little early.
Well, Mission Impossible killed Indy.
Yeah.
Or maybe Indy killed itself. Well, Con killed Indy. I mean, showing it at Con, it just wasn't the right film. And though Harrison was being honored quite rightly, and unfortunately, it just soured people, and I think it scared the marketing folks at Disney, and then and then Mission Impossible came out on July 12th. So that kicked Indy out of the IMAX screens, which are the big money makers. And of course, it's a great film to see in IMAX. And then Oppenheimer kicked Mission Impossible out of IMAX a week later, and then ran in IMAX for like a month and a half.
It was a very long time.
Yeah, we're still figuring out this post-pandemic theatrical release thing. Like everybody wants to get in, but they're stepping on top of each other, and it's unfortunate because these movies deserve a fair shot. I'm glad that Disney Plus, though, like that they have the Indiana Jones collection, that it includes Young Indy, and that Indy 5 will go in there when it eventually finds its way on the platform. I wish it was a little more prominent. Like it's kind of still hard to find on there, but it is there, everybody. You can find the Indiana Jones collection on Disney Plus.
And partly because they have the 5 categories of Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel, National Geographic, and what's the other one? There's a 5th one. So where does it go? Pixar, of course, Pixar. And so where does it go, right? Is it Disney? No. Yes, maybe. Right? There's no Lucasfilm section, and I mean they wrote off Willow, so that's not even on there anymore. Anyway, we're going back to the business side.
No, it's good. Business is important.
It is a business. This happened to Star Trek too. Star Trek Prodigy was removed. It's available for purchase, and I think on Blu-ray and DVD. But it just wasn't, the economics of it. And, we think that every single piece of media that's been created since, T.W. Griffith and the Lumiere brothers should be available, but it's not. And Young Indy for many years was very hard to find. It went in and out. And, the Disney vault, things went in the vault. I remember as a kid, like, oh my gosh, Bedknobs and Broomsticks is coming back for 3 weeks. I've never saw Bedknobs and Broomsticks. I was born after it came out. I must see this because it's Mary Poppins 2, right? And it's not actually quite as good as Mary Poppins, but so the studios and have been figuring out how to leverage this content and create demand. I hope Young Indy stays. The only thing that I wish they had done, and maybe they haven't, I just haven't looked, is there is a wealth of material. There's 4 to 5 documentaries per movie about the history and the time period and whatnot. And that was very much in George's vision, and we were aware of it at the time. I mean, it worked for me. I mean, like Albert Schweitzer, I'd never heard of Albert Schweitzer. I'm running off to read a biography about Albert Schweitzer because he shows up in Young Indy.
My Albert is too modest. Back in Europe, he was a renowned recitalist.
Helene, bitte.
And lecturer. He holds degrees in philosophy, theology, and medicine. He's written books on all those subjects.
Helene, you're boring this young man to tears. Me as well.
He hates to brag.
Winston Churchill.
But if this government continues to deny the vote to soldiers who are serving in France, what kind of a democracy would that be?
What kind of a democracy is it now when half the population are not allowed to vote simply because they are women?
And other people like that who, like I knew the name, of course I had heard of Winston Churchill, but I knew nothing about him. And there he is getting, truffle on his face from Indy.
From Elizabeth Hurley, you mean?
From Elizabeth Hurley, right. It's not actually Elizabeth Hurley does it, right, when they're talking about the suffragette movement. Oh, by the way, I've heard of that too, but what does that actually really mean? And off you go and you research it.
We don't want luck and we don't want charity. I know girls what's working in munitions factories, getting wages half as much as what the men used to get paid for the same job. Now that's not right, and no one can say that it is. Equal pay for equal work. That's all we're asking. Equal pay for equal work.
Because it's interesting.
Those DVD sets are spectacular and hard. They're still, you can get them online. They are out there, but hard to find, and most people wouldn't even know to look, which is a real shame.
And it's I remember growing up feeling like Young Indy it always felt like it was in the same category as like Star Trek the Animated Series or even like Willow to a degree, where it's like it exists, but it's hard to find, and we're not entirely sure if the creators want you to find it. And now obviously we know that was mostly just rumor and whatever, but like, it always felt a little like this outlier. And I think part of the reason why Daniel and I really wanted to do this podcast is just to bring more attention to the show. I mean, even though it is accessible now, not enough people are talking about it. And we kind of wanted to shine a light, because even though, and this is partly just because the show had a premature end, but there wasn't a lot of behind the scenes material that came out, except for with the first season. There was a lot of like promotional, behind the scenes stuff then, but like not a lot after that. And so part of what we're doing here is just trying to collect all these stories about the time and that period and bring more attention to it.
That's great. We really appreciate it. I mean, again, it's I think it's really good TV, and actually, in some ways, like other things, it was too early, frankly. This actually would have been a great streaming show if done in the past few years, because it was cerebral, and you couldn't really, and partly the Indiana Jones brand. It was hard to mesh that with what we were putting on TV. So that was, we were aware of that too. We were like, this probably needs a little bit more action. I'm not entirely sure I really care about Puccini wooing Indy's mom.
Please don't.
I want to hold you in my arms.
It is not possible.
You are a beautiful woman.
I am married.
Yes, I am too. But it must be a sin to run away from what God has brought together.
It's interesting.
It's a great episode, though. Great episode.
It's a great episode, but it's not what somebody who stumbles into Indiana Jones is going to expect, right. Particularly. And I will say, to kind of call myself out on this, when I first saw the George Hall stuff in the museum, and that where he's kind of berating these kids who were sneaking off from their school tour. I'm like, who's that?
Hold on, I'll clobber you. Be cool, man. Be cool.
And my boss was like, well, that's Indy. I mean, he's wearing the fedora. I mean, but he had an eye patch on. I'm like, that's Indy?
Right.
He's overweight and he's got a cane.
Right.
That's, certainly wasn't my expectation going into the show that we'd, see Indy at the end of his life. Well, he's still alive, right? I mean, he's born in 1899, but he's still out there somewhere.
Yeah, he never does.
Right now, yes, he's still with us.
Right now, he's 124.
He drank from the Holy Grail, and it doesn't work forever, but it extends his life
900 years or something, 600 years or whatever it is. And so so even that, getting over that, and I think if it had been a little bit like, certainly seasons 1 and 2 of Next Gen. Star Trek Next Generation, we look at the back now, some of the episodes fondly, some of them like, no, Skin of Evil still kind of is a weird episode, and Why'd You Kill Tasha Yar? Although then what you did with Tasha Yar was so much better than what they were doing with Tasha Yar at the time. It's it's the power of writers and creatives to figure this stuff out. But if you watch those first couple episodes in the first seasons, and didn't stick with it, to get to season 3, where all of a sudden it really clicks. Or DS9. I mean, that's another one, right? DS9, sort of berated by fans, about it's on a station and blah, 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 blah. There's a great documentary on Deep Space Nine, What We Left Behind, that Ira Stephen Barr produced and put out. And that show, I mean, it's gritty, and it's dealing with war, and it's dealing with loss, and it's on a minor key. Oh my gosh, if that were done today, I think they've tried to do that with Star Trek Discovery, and I don't think it's worked as well as DS9 worked. Strange New Worlds, I think, works really well, and Lower Decks is a hoot. But if you did DS9 today, the world is ready for that kind of Star Trek. Like, yeah, it kind of sucks. Like, the Federation isn't all rosy and things. And again, ahead of their time. And I think Young Indy, again, with the history and the ability to get all this information and to really not only have to wait for the DVDs to get the behind the scenes, but to do the after show, stuff and the podcast and all that sort of stuff, official or unofficial, I think actually, I wish they would bring it back. I wish they'd try again.
I agree with you 100%, but I also contend that it might have been a show that would have been better suited on PBS at the time, where there was a little more signaling that there's an educational component to this. That's okay. And then we're also going to talk about it with documentaries and such on either end of it, which PBS was just formatted for at the time. Obviously they would not have been able to pay $1 million an episode, but because PBS is never funded, but
not at all.
It might have worked out better there. It's the only sad part is George wouldn't be around to do a new version of it. And that's the sad part.
Yeah. I had suggested at the time to anyone who would listen, although George never would have done it. I actually also think if he had followed the Walt Disney model of presenting the material, I thought or somebody had presented the material, and maybe not with the old Indy sequences, but in this episode we catch up with Indy, who's on the run from the Kaiser and meets Charles de Gaulle, who would be the future president of France and a World War II hero and blah, 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 that framing would have set the tone. I'm inviting you into the living room, classroom, if you will. And so we're on this journey together, and let me share it with you. And I'm storytelling.
It's funny because I came to it on VHS, and the VHS versions, they're the TV movie edits, but they each have a little intro by George.
Oh.
And so actually what you're describing...
Really? I've never opened mine.
Yeah. It's more like interview style than like, someone talking to the camera.
The Lafayette Escadrille during World War I was made up of young men somewhat like Indiana Jones who, before the United States entered the war, wanted to be a part of it. It has to do a lot with idealism, because I'd established early on that Indiana Jones was a friend of Ned Lawrence, who was eventually called Lawrence of Arabia, and he was involved in this battle around Palestine. As it happened, a lot of my characters could come together in this one place and show the involvement of the Australian light horsemen in this pivotal campaign in World War I in the Middle East.
It's exactly what you're describing, and certainly for me discovering it on VHS, like, it did draw me in, right? It did sort of set the table for me.
Yeah. Oh, I have never seen that footage. I've never heard that before. I mean, literally have them. Paramount gave them all to me when I worked on Star Trek.
Oh, wow.
And I just like, oh my God, these collector's items, I'm never going to open them.
I can send you the ones I have caught, like I've digitized. They're very short.
We'll talk. I have all the episodes, or most of them.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. Off those master tapes. Yeah.
Wow. That's fantastic.
That's amazing.
So I revisit them every now and then. By the way, there is an example of this that I think wasn't all that successful. The Back to the Future cartoon, the animated Back to the Future, which had a science introduction.
Christopher Lloyd.
From Christopher Lloyd, yeah.
Well, there we go.
So they tried. People were trying. I think they were on it, and
well, I think that was his intent with the old indie bookends. I just think it didn't work as well, perhaps, as something more straightforward, which is compelling.
That's right. Oh well.
Laird, you've been so generous with your time here. We promised you an hour, and it's been over an hour and 40 now. So
I'm not getting OT for this. What are you talking about? No, it's my pleasure. I could go another hour, but you won't want an episode that long.
Well,
so thank you.
I hope we can get
so
you back
much.
sometime. I mean, this has been
absolutely.
We should do a music episode. We didn't talk about the music at all. That could be great.
I would be happy to talk about that. Joel McNeely and Lawrence Rosenthal are the main composers, but Francis Talgorn and Frederick Talgorn, and a few other composers came in and out and did stuff. Yeah, I mean, again, and they were recording, orchestras. The first episode, I'll throw this in. It's a preview of this future music episode, folks. The movie of the week, that first episode, was recorded at Skywalker Sound on the scoring stage with local union players, which is why that music's never been released. And then everything else was recorded, and most everything else was recorded in Prague, because the Prague City Orchestra was getting into doing film stuff. So you had a conservatory-trained body of 80 musicians, and these, Lawrence Rosenthal had done a ton of stuff, and Joel McNeely was almost kind of at the beginning of his career doing things. And so you had this really good mix of composer talent, and we're told to not use the indie theme. I'm sure partly that was economic, to not have to pay the rights, although it is in the Chicago episode with Harrison. But it was supposed to be a new sound. It was supposed to be a jazzy, for the era sound.
Well, we'll save it, because I do have all sorts of questions, but we'll do it next time.
Love it. Laird, do you have any contact info or websites or whatever you'd like to tell out to the audience?
Oh, yeah, thanks. The IndyCast.com is the home of the John Williams specials. We just recorded the 64th, we covered the Dial of Destiny soundtrack, and we'll continue until someone tells us to stop. And we don't just cover indie music. We've well branched out into John Williams's film, over 120 movies and TV and concert works. And then the other one is Rebel Force Radio /BondCast, I want to say, is actually, we'll get you there. Just go to Rebel Force Radio and then find BondCast and the tiles there. And the longest ever commentary on the Bond films as we started a decade ago, and as we have not made it to Pierce Brosnan yet.
I'm so excited for Brosnan. I'm so excited for Brosnan.
Oh, I have comments on GoldenEye. Yes, you will hear those. But I love GoldenEye.
Me too.
Except for the score.
Yeah. Well,
I love everything about it except for the score. Anyway, so that's those are kind of the places that are easier to find me, and I'm findable on various other platforms. Anyone wants to reach out to me, reach out to the show, and they'll get you in touch with me.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you very much again for being here. We look forward to having you back. I feel like we could go on for hours and hours and hours on this. So, but next time we will have you on. And so for Daniel and myself, audience, thanks for being here. If you like the show, please rate us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps get our show out there for other people to find. So until next time, thanks for being here, and I hope to see you again.
Next time on the Young Indy Chroniclers.
We're thrilled to have David Schneider, the series producer of 94 documentaries, which chronicled the stories of the real-life inspirations for the series.
I'm a journalist by trade. There was a great deal of pressure to release the Indiana Jones movies. He finally agreed under the provision that funding was also made to get Young Indy on DVD, along with this companion documentary idea.
Where did you source the historic footage?
From all over the world. You did that in a fictional account, people would say, come on.